I'm Harold Hunt. I'm a research economist with the Texas A&M Real Estate Research Center.
And I'm Steve Ramseur. I teach in the Master Real Estate program and spent 34 years in the commercial real estate industry.
I'm Bucky Banks. I teach in the Master's Real Estate program as well as the Mays Business School.
We've co-authored 2 articles so far on artificial intelligence. We've got a third one to come. What we're discussing today is the second one, and really the second one is about the advantages of an AI-focused business model versus a traditional business model. So there seems to be a lot of interest in AI. It seems like a new article every day, and I'm just sort of wondering, what do y'all think? Is AI going to be fact or fiction?
I think there are a couple of trends that indicate AI is more fact than fiction. One is the amount of investment. Corporations invested almost 500% more in AI last year than they did in 2023. Another one is the speed of adoption. And if you look at how quickly ChatGPT was adopted, 100 million weekly users in 2 months. Compare that to Uber. Took 13 years to get to 100 million monthly users. So I think adoption is there. And then finally, the amount of data. ChatGPT algorithms were trained on about 45 terabytes of compressed data. And so if you think about adoption, investment, and fuel, I think the elements are there for AI to be real.
So do you think what is the big advantage of an AI-focused business model versus the traditional model? Steve, I'll start with you.
Yeah, having worked in a large commercial real estate services firm for over 30 years, you really have the silos of the different service lines that make it difficult to share knowledge and information. Also, you have discrete software platforms that support each of the service lines, and you don't really have a unified data strategy. That makes it difficult. With an AI-first business model, more of a platform business model, and I like to think about that as really, Harold, an iPhone. You have a common piece of hardware, you have a OS software system, and you can just send updates right into the iPhone. So if you think about the difference between a traditional model, business model, and an AI-first business model, it's really one of knowledge transfer and learning and the ability to very quickly adopt technology.
I think to ride on that, from the investor's perspective, their basic idea is that they need to have information that can be presented clearly so that they can make decisions where they can mitigate risk. When you look at a lot of investors from institutional spaces, they're having to run through many, many deals, and being able to streamline the process of taking what might be a speculative opportunity into something that's in their pipeline is really going to be contingent on their ability to make a decision clearly and, as a consequence, make it quickly. There's always going to be capital fighting for good deals. And then you look at smaller investors, smaller shops, maybe private shops that are friends and family starting out but potentially growing. You're going to tend to find faster adoption simply because it will give them a leg up from a labor perspective. Although it's not as efficient as it will be 5, 7, 10 years from now, or for that matter, even maybe 12 months from now, you're going to tend to find leaner, smaller shops making decisive and subsequently impactful capital allocations and decisions and investments based on the fact that they can do it knowledgeably. They may not have a team of investor or analysts. They may not have the most broad access to data, but what they will have is the ability to take information in smaller markets and act decisively and quickly.
So Bucky, there's got to be a lot of small firms out there that are wondering, how do I even start this? I mean, what are some of the questions that they should ask before they jump into AI?
I would have to say that it'd start with saying, what are the things or the processes that take the longest amount of time that are ultimately simple? One of the simplest things might be collection of data, right? You have a lot of avenues through which you can purchase data, but ultimately and access to an unlimited amount of data is not necessarily helpful if you're 1 or 2 or 5-person shop. So if you are able to very quickly take a 30,000-foot view right on down to 1,000 feet, then you can start making much clearer decisions much faster. While the team of, say, 25 analysts working in a bullpen would be able to do that over the course of 1 or 2 days, with real data that is perhaps, extremely high quality and, acquired directly from the source, more general data will become clearer and more useful for smaller shops simply because it will be able to allocate and aggregate all of that data and kind of present it in a way that it might not be as accurate as something that you would see in an institutional shop, but for what it's worth, to be able to make an actionable decision at a small or kind of a boutique level, you're going to see people turning it into actionable data.
So do they have to have a pretty good idea of what questions that they want to answer with AI before they start?
I think that they will. I think you're right. They will have to have a clear idea of what they're asking the model, because the model's only going to be as accurate as their question is precise. So if they have a clear idea of what they need, then the model will likely be able to, through a couple of iterations, give them, I would say, maybe a 95% certain answer. Will that be something that initially people are willing to take a risk on? I would say that it depends on the appetite for risk of the investor, or the appetite of risk associated with their investment thesis in the shop.
And Steve, what about the people? I mean, which firms will have the right people and which firms won't? Will it be smaller firms that have to go out and look for consultants, or?
I think that this really is a leadership imperative, and it starts with a change of mindset and a recognition that we may not have the data scientist or the right product management team. We may not have those levels of expertise. Do we hire those individuals? Do we outsource that? But it really comes with a change of mindset. Are we setting our company up for not only the information age, but really where AI is going to move the real estate industry?
And do you think that there's going to be big winners and big losers? I mean, or it's sort of early, I guess, but I mean, obviously the first adapters may be really ahead of the people that don't adapt it so quickly.
I think that firms that are more agile with their business model, where they understand how they create and capture value, and then they have the scope and the scale, and then how they transfer learning within the organization. If there's agility at those intersections, and they're willing to adopt and engage with new technologies, I think those firms will have a competitive advantage even over the larger services firms out there.
And so, Bucky, for people that get replaced by AI, I mean, what do you think what should they do?
I think that my experience in using the technology, my experience in trying to see what the technology provides real estate professionals versus what it might provide them in such a way that it maybe negates the necessity or creates a redundancy for certain people in the workforce, I found that it tends to create as much work in a different way as it solves in one way. So a simple example might be that somebody could understand very clearly how to, let's use something that I have maybe too much experience in, working in a pro forma. Let's say they have somebody who understands how to build certain aspects of the pro forma. Frankly speaking, 12, 24 months from now, I'm sure that AI tools will be able to clearly code a lot of those tools, those calculators, with far greater accuracy and sophistication than somebody like you or I could in a much shorter time. But it's going to require somebody who has an extremely refined understanding of what every single line item means and what the implication of those line items are in relation to everything else inside of the pro forma, to be able to say, yes, this is working accurately, or no, it's not. And so I think that while you might see some of the more kind of brute strength slowly be replaced, you're going to see more of the refined understanding and the ability to say, let's just take something like a joint venture partnership agreement or a term sheet. Those are sophisticated documents to model, and ultimately it's going to require somebody who understands the term sheet very well to be able to understand whether or not the model, the math, is accurately reflecting the two. So while you might understand the formulas, and you may not be able to build it as quickly as, say, the model or the AI could, it's going to require you to say, yes, this is accurate and reflects the legal document.
Well, I think to jump in real quickly.
Yeah,
I think it's
absolutely.
important to think in terms of offense and defense.
Okay.
So from an offensive perspective, you need to have the right business model, the right architecture, business architecture, to engage with and employ the technology and really understand your data architecture.
Hmm.
And so you get the offense in place. Defensively, thinking about how do we really create and capture value? What's our value proposition for the customer? And then begin to think about how we can take very administrative tasks, perfunctory tasks, and we can use algorithms
Hmm.
to automate those perfunctory tasks. And then you use the skill set that you have, unique as a real estate professional, to really focus on that high level value proposition for the customer, the person who's paying you the fee or hiring you to do the job. So I think offense and defense. And again, it comes down to a leadership mindset that recognizes that what got you here is not going to get you there.
I think of it as kind of, rather than focusing on the what of what we're trying to achieve, it's being able to focus on the why so that you can put the what's in order.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that that would be kind of an accurate assessment?
Yeah, yes, having been involved in technology for 15 years in a large Fortune 500 corporation,
Hmm.
the biggest hurdle that has to be overcome is management leadership, thinking that what we have done to date is going to be sufficient to get us to the next level. And when you think about that generationally, we have 5 generations in the workforce today.
Mm-hmm.
You think about our generation transferring out, the next generation coming in. We really have to think about how do we set them up for success as well.
You know, Steve, you and I were talking about money the other day and cost. And do you think that there are office tenants out there that are wondering, should I stay in the space that I'm in, or should I move up to nicer space? How should I spend that money if AI is going to cost a lot? What are some of the decisions they're thinking about?
I think in the tenant improvement allocation, the amount of tenant improvement dollars that are going to go towards the IT component of the fit out of the space versus the physical component fit out of the space will change. And if end users are able to use AI to drive efficiencies and costs out of the business, and they're able to improve the overall experience for employees, then the combination of increased tenant improvements, the capital that goes into the space for IT, with the efficiencies will hopefully help draw people back into the built environment.
And I guess you could use AI to search the buildings around where you are at, right? To very efficiently look at which ones are LEED certified. You talked earlier today about which ones are LEED certified, what the rents are, things like that, Bucky.
I think that you'll notice that, you're right. People will ultimately get out and realize there are advantages. For every potentially risk to someone's current competitive advantage, there are going to be 2 or 3 advantages that pop up. I think that from a tenant perspective, they're going to be able to say, I can see where costs, like you said, are being passed on to me. If this building is LEED certified, the greater degree of efficiency will result in the ability to have lower cost from an operating perspective. Potentially, those benefits will be passed on to tenants in the form of lower rents. Naturally, the quality of life potentially could be higher also for tenants being in something that has, as we noted in one of our earlier articles, stimulates a biophilic response where you simply understand that not only the aesthetic but also the quality of being in the building actually engenders some degree of positive physical, either emotive or intellectual or just otherwise biological response. But ultimately, you're right. People will find ways to either seek out some sort of positive experience because the building itself elicits that from a personal perspective, or they're going to be able to go and look at the market at large, aggregate a massive amount of data that previously they couldn't, and make a solid argument for why either there should be some sort of cost-benefit pass-through, or they should be able to negotiate lower rents.
So have we missed anything? Is there anything critical that you guys can think of that we should bring up before we finish?
Well, I think if we circle back around to where you started the conversation, is this fact or fiction? The difference between an innovation being a fad and being a hard trend, the difference between, for example, the internet and the cloud versus a pet rock, right? For example.
I still have
that
mine.
I'd get a laugh out of Bucky on that one, but is the ability to generate ROI. And within the commercial real estate space, the world's largest asset class, AI coupled with IoT, the Internet of Things, and edge cloud computing and these other technologies has the opportunity to drive not only ROI to the investor, but I think it has significant implications for preventative maintenance on building systems, on security, on how we think about the life of a building, how we think about the health of the environment within the building, another article that we wrote together. And so I see AI really permeating each of the different aspects of the commercial real estate industry. But as commercial real estate professionals, we want to tie it back to that return on investment. And I think that's what is going to contribute, not only the data and the adoption and the investment, but that's what's going to contribute to the longevity of artificial intelligence.
And if I might just add one more thing, something that we've talked about a number of times, and a data point that you shared with me that really made an impression was that adults spend 90% of their time indoors. That means that we're engaging the built environment 90% of every single day. And if you look at cars, which let's just say we engage maybe 3 to 5% of every single day, depending on traffic and your commute, cars are currently consuming massive amounts of data concerning the drivers, the owners, and that data is being monetized. If you realize that 90% of our time is in the built environment, it's just a matter of time before, as we noted in kind of our last discussion, that becomes something that every single landlord is going to want to either monetize or at the very least monitor.
Yeah, we have a piece in the article that says, if you don't know what to do, here's step 1, step 2, step 3. So can you guys kind of speak to lay out those steps?
Sure. All of us know that real estate is about location, 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 but AI is about data, data, data. The starting point with AI is to make sure that you have clean and available data to train the algorithms. Really, the second step is taking a look at your business model and asking the hard questions. Are we too siloed? Do we have data that are sitting on a combination of shared drives and laptops as well as in the cloud? Do we have our data strategy together? And then finally, the third step, I think it's really to sit back and ask, do we have the right people in the right roles working together to continue to serve our customers? So I would go with those three. I would start with the data strategy, then I would move to our organizational structure, and then number 3, I would take a look at our roles.
And from the individual, approaching this thinking, well, where do I fit in terms of the data strategy, or where do I fit in terms of what my current role is and what it will become? I think it's incumbent upon every single individual to more or less say, what do I do well? What does my contribution look like? And how does AI augment that? Because there will inevitably be inefficiencies. And your ability to identify those inefficiencies and then contribute by saying, I understand what the inefficiencies are, where AI may not be able to fully replace me. I can actually participate in bringing AI into the data strategy. You've immediately created, call it a hybrid role for yourself as an individual. So from a corporate perspective, there may be efficiencies that are being sought, but there's no world in which the system is so efficient that people can be fully ruled out quite yet. So I definitely think that if people can find those inefficiencies on individual levels, role by role, and position within that overall strategy, there's definitely opportunity for people to kind of transition into the new economy.
Just to get real for a minute, and when I went from being president of occupier services for a Fortune 500 company where I had brokerage and project management and our industry practice groups, and that was someplace I was comfortable working in. And then when I took the role as Chief Innovation Officer, I had to learn an entirely new language. The first time I walked into a room with our TDIM team, our IT team, I recognized that I didn't understand the roles. I didn't have a common language, and I had to go back to school and retrain and relearn, and it was a really humbling experience. And I think that's where a lot of leaders find themselves right now, is AI is everywhere except in my shop. And when we kind of sit back and look at that, it's a daunting leadership challenge. And I just have to say, going through that, that's why we wanted to write the article the way that we did, where it's step by step. Here's the why. Why should I care about AI? Here's the what and the how, and then we're going to talk about the use cases. I just think it's really important to recognize what a significant leap for real estate leaders this is.
And individually, people just have to make a decision. Do I want to learn something new or not? So we'll see, I guess,
One thing I'm curious about, and Steve, I'd like your thoughts on this. Every single year that goes by, we have more or less people who are, let's say they're 30 now, but they have been born after the internet. And so there has never been a world in which the internet has not been an element of their ecosystem, their intellectual architecture. And we're now entering a world where children that are elementary school age are living in a world where artificial intelligence has never been something that they're not aware of. And so while a number of people may say this is a skill to adopt, there has to be a different perspective, and I'm curious to what you think. There has to be a different perspective in much the same way that the internet natives were able to approach possibly adopting AI. What will the AI natives approach simply utilizing or optimizing it?
I think that it comes down to the definition of intelligence and what it means to be human.
You're probably right.
And those are esoteric philosophical questions for this conversation, but I think that we are in a sea change of really understanding how do we define intelligence, what does it mean to be human, and then based upon the answer to those two questions, how does that elementary school student then point the trajectory of their given career?
Maybe it's a fundamental shift in the way that we view human labor and utility.
I think what you and I have talked about a lot is the post-labor society, way beyond this recording. But are we dangerously moving in that direction? I think also with AI, you have to recognize that I've talked about this. There's an epistemology within every technology, and we have to be aware of what that means for each of the employees.
Yeah, transitioning away from a sense of function to all of a sudden a sense of simply accommodating something that has the core function, us no longer being the thing that can even do it.
I think that we have to deal at some point with
the ontological implications.
We do.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to deal with the fear that comes along with this. I mean, When I was put into a role, all of a sudden I was responsible for our data strategy, having worked in commercial real estate for 27 years at that point. And you're asking leaders to just stand in front of the fire hose and learn all of this while they're running their existing business, serving their existing customers, and dealing with their existing employees. And it's a massive ask. I still think that we need to do a series on the leadership changes and demands.
But it's not just that there's a massive ask in terms of learning. It's you're effectively training a system to understand how to do everything that you do in a way that is completely dispassionate, stripped of the relatively natural sense of aesthetic imparting some degree of importance. Ultimately, you're imparting everything that you have into an optimization function that really renders much of what we find as the beneficial outcome of optimizing irrelevant.
Well, with AI, Bucky, you're effectively training your replacement.
Absolutely, moment by moment.
And and now I'm talking about your generative AI and those large language models that are able to recognize patterns and create new content. So you're training your replacement that then can perform many of the job functions faster, cheaper, simpler than you could, and it never needs a week off, a day off. It doesn't
No.
eat or drink.
Labor cost is zero.
Labor cost is zero, and that's my biggest concern is when does the cost of cognition go to zero?
And I think that, this is the shocking and rather bizarre thing is that Harold brought something up just the other day, and it was that most generative AI has consumed and analyzed all available data, and they're now providing it with synthetic data. And when you look at synthetic data, the first thing you more or less say is you've gone from saying, to return to your football metaphor, we've run through all the tape on offenses that we could possibly come up with, so now we're playing video games. And when you think you're training players to play football based not on the physics of reality, but based on the physics of a physics that is a simulacra, now you start asking the question of, are we even training these systems to work efficiently? I mean, it draws into that question. These kinds of things. And this is where I think it goes back to this notion of we may be contributing to a replacement, and there may become a point where the cost of, like you say, cognition falls to zero, and our labor is no longer fundamentally necessary. But we do have to remain involved because otherwise it will get to that point where it trains itself based on its own understanding of what it is. And I feel as though that would be kind of a feedback loop that...
Yeah, and we haven't talked, Harold and I have talked extensively about the demands on the power grid.
Oh, that's,
From the data centers and what it takes to run these large language models, the amount of power and the amount of greenhouse gases and emissions that these data centers emit. And you look at the fact that the new Microsoft data center requires as much power as 300,000 homes. And you begin to think about what the implications of that are. And
here's just to, I think, to put that into kind of a context that people can understand. 300,000 homes at 2.5 residents per home on average is coming in at,
a good sized city.
Yeah, we're talking about 750,000 people, right? And if you're talking about 750,000 people, there are only 10 cities in America that exceed 750,000 people. The single power demand of one of their systems becomes immediately one of the 10 largest cities in America in terms of demand. That's to say nothing of many of the other businesses that are operating and things like that. It's just, it starts to ask the question, and this is something that I don't think we've touched on, but something that I think we've not touched on today, but something we've kind of discussed, and it's that at what point do we start getting to the point where there is AI that is achieving an aim, the aim of which is no longer beneficial to the collective, right? We could say post-labor, labor falls to zero in terms of cost, which means, hey, this banana is effectively free. That gallon of gas should be free. The cost to build this house, effectively zero. But then that optimization question is saying, why are we sourcing gasoline? Why are we building homes? Why are we harvesting bananas? And you ultimately have to say, well, it has to be a fundamentally anthropocentric, like AI model. Now we're starting to ask, well, do we have that from a macro perspective? Can we assert that all of these AI models are fundamentally aiming towards that end?
But autonomous learning within AI doesn't require the same level of reinforcement learning that most of the models require today. So once you have an autonomous model, given an unlimited amount of data and power, it can begin writing the algorithms to where you don't need to
satisfy its own aim, whatever that might be, however irrelevant it is to our own benefit.
Having spent the last 10 years in this field around commercial real estate, I am concerned.
I think that what you trend towards would be, you wouldn't have AI models where they're, simply operating tasks for the sole satisfaction of the model. What I think, though, is that you would have models that would reinforce governance, that would create inefficiencies for what the most basic human aims are. A good example would be the kind of zoning constraints that exist where people say, density creates certain kinds of carbon outputs that are bad for the environment. Ergo, we will not build higher density homes in this particular area. To which they then say that we have a housing crisis. And you go, well, clearly you must either alleviate one and sort of say, well, we'll accommodate the carbon constraints here so that we can alleviate housing constraints. Or you will have to simply say people can't live in this particular area, they'll have to go somewhere else. To which you then say, but then there are no job opportunities there, so do we subsidize them? Well, this just creates a very contradictory and inefficient kind of form of policy. So you have to have more or less models that are working towards alleviating problems rather than compounding or creating problems.
Well, this has been great. Thank you guys for showing up and discussing this interesting subject. And if you'd like to read the full article, go to our website. And thank you for your time.